Hey folks, welcome into the DarkHorse Podcast live stream Q&A 78 May 1st, 2021. Right? Did I get all that right?
Yeah, you did.
That was a lot of information. Oh, I should say, I forgot I should have announced during the main podcast that we have a new Dark Horse discussion up with me and Jamie Wheel. And so if you haven't checked it out, you should check it out. I just slipped my mind that we had another announcement.
So Jamie's new book is out. Is that right?
Jamie's new book is out.
Awesome.
Recapture the Rapture.
Nice.
And that's not the only clever turn of phrase in the book, I should
sure
tell you.
It's not.
No.
So I have not listened to your conversation with Jamie yet, but he's terrific. We became friends with him a few years ago, and his first book, co-authored with Stephen Kotler, is Stealing Fire.
Yep.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
It's excellent. Is that the right title? Did I have it right?
Yes.
I think that's right. Anyway, it's excellent. I imagine this next one is too. So
It's good. You got to get past his thick Texas accent, but once you do, it's awesome.
No, he does not.
Well, some kind of accent. I assumed it was Texas because that's where I was talking to him.
Really?
Yep.
Okay. And for those of you who are concerned, the other two cats do still exist. We just decided not to tell them about the cream this week because one of them was not having an easy time digesting it. So that's what's going on behind us. One very pleased Fairfax.
Yes.
First, we're going to start with 3 questions from last week, move into questions from the Discord server, and then jump into questions from this week. 1. Do you see any opportunities to apply evolutionary processes to areas or problems not generally addressed in that way? For instance, AI, education, business, government policy, etc. Do you see any obvious low-hanging fruit?
Yes, it's all over the place.
It's everywhere, right?
The problem is convincing people that it is. But yeah, the fact...
And this is a lot of what we do, right? Like, I mean, frankly, this is the vaccinologists and virologists going like, you don't have any expertise, you're evolutionary biologists. Like, dudes, if you don't understand that viruses evolve, we got a problem here.
Yeah, and we do have exactly that problem, apparently.
Yes.
Yeah, no, the low-hanging fruit is all over the place. It takes a certain amount of getting used to. You have to learn to think this way. But, in essence, the vaccine and COVID evolution question comes down to you want to create an unjumpable evolutionary gap. You want to create an obstacle so difficult that evolution cannot cross it. And instead, what we seem to be doing is creating an easy jump, creating small enough steps that selection can figure their way across them. And, if only we could make that point simply so that we didn't endlessly run into this sort of utopian thinking about solutions.
And you have actually explicitly made this argument with regard to AI, an analogous argument anyway.
AI, and I've also made it in the context of fourth frontier solutions for governance, which is that you don't want to give the corrupting influences a training course on how to corrupt better. You want to give them a situation in which the attempt to corrupt the system is ruinous and is such a big setback that those who engage in it do not end up ahead but behind.
Yep. And discussion of Fourth Frontier comprises the final chapter of our book, which will be out in a few months. Okay, next question. Why is childbirth painful and dangerous? Walking upright, big heads, farming revolution? ? How will it evolve considering diets? Best regards from Finland. You would love it here. Consider visiting one day. So there's sort of 3 hypotheses, 3 possibilities proposed here. Walking upright, big heads, farming revolution. I don't think agricultural revolution has anything, made things worse with regard to childbirth, with the possible caveat that if women are less active, certainly not being as fit makes childbirth more dangerous. But the first 2 things here, the becoming bipedal, that move from being quadrupedal to bipedal and changing hip shape in order to become stable, and women not having such wide hips that they become unstable, in combination with large heads as a result of our big brains, which is a big part of what makes humans human. That combination is the thing that is usually described as why childbirth in humans is so much different and harder and more dangerous than it is for everyone else, really.
So I'm surprised to hear you say you don't think the agricultural revolution, or at least the abundance of food, has made things worse, because it seems to
You
me
think
that's-
babies are bigger?
Yeah, I think they're going to be less scrawny.
But heads aren't fatter.
I've run into some fat heads in my day, and
I know we say that, but it's not actually what we mean, right? And I mean, it's possible that heads are also getting bigger, but the less scrawny babies and longer babies won't make birth more difficult. It really is head diameter.
Yeah, head diameter, which is why birth has been moved earlier in the developmental sequence.
Incidentally, actually, Bob Trivers tweeted yesterday a new result, and I can't remember, maybe while you're answering something, I'll figure out. I can't remember what species it was in, but that found evidence for genomic imprinting in which maternally derived genes cause gestation to be shorter. And paternally imprinted genes cause gestation to be longer. So you have, for everyone, rather than us having this private conversation here, following from David Haig's seminal work in the 1990s, the idea that genes are able to keep track of what parent they came from and will have different incentives in terms of things like fetal growth, depending on whether or not they came from the mother, who is interested in the survival and success of her baby, but also in the survival and success of future babies, or if those genes, those alleles, came from the father, who, in a non-monogamous species at least, is unlikely to have any future kids with that mother, and so has only an interest in the maximum survival and success of that individual, and not in the future reproductive output of the mother. So the idea, the prediction then was that that maternally imprinted genes, maternally derived genes in fetuses would push towards smaller birth weights and shorter gestation times and such, and the paternally imprinted or derived genes would push towards higher birth rates and longer gestation times. And there's a piece of empirical research that finds this.
That's amazing. I did not catch that tweet, nor did I see that research yet. I will say you just blew right by that awesome argument in favor of monogamy. One of my favorite arguments in favor of my favorite breeding system of all time. I mean, it's great.
Are you just saying that because I'm sitting here?
I'm saying that because I found the right person. I'm sure monogamy is a pain in the ass if you end up with the wrong person, but having not ended up with the wrong person, I'm all in favor.
Okay, so what did I blow past?
Well, no, you said it, but it was just like so fast. And the idea, it's multifaceted too. The idea is the conflict between that fraction of the genome of the fetus that comes from the father. The conflict between that fraction of the genome and the mother is much greater if the father is out of there and therefore has no interest or little interest in the ongoing well-being of the mother and has an interest in his offspring taking more than its share. Whereas if you have a monogamous system where the next offspring is going to be his as well, he has a much more concordant interest, and the fetuses have a concordant interest because the next offspring is going to be a full sib rather than a half sib.
Reduces sibling rivalry, among other things.
So does. Yeah. It's just a better system.
It's just better. Yeah. I think it might have been horses. I'll look it up.
All right.
Yeah. Wait, so I'm not sure we finished though. You were saying you were surprised that I didn't think the agricultural revolution would have had much to do with it because of the well-fettedness of the babies, and we went to fat heads and then we went to genomic imprinting.
Yes.
Got it.
See, we just recapped the whole interchange right there.
Yep. All right, next question. If there was a less lethal ancestor virus and it spread in an area near Wuhan in southern China, would you expect to see higher immunity in the same countries reporting very little spread of the current virus? For instance, China, Vietnam, Taiwan. I think TW stands for Taiwan.
A less lethal variant that spread beforehand. Well, first of all, I would certainly expect evidence of that. But yeah, could.
So I think the question is taking that part on, like, suppose this.
Yeah.
There's a less lethal ancestor virus and it spread near Wuhan. If that were the case, would you expect to see higher immunity in the same countries reporting very little spread of the current virus?
Definitely.
So I mean, I think the question basically is, could we take what we actually see empirically in terms of countries that had low infection rates as possibly evidence, not
Well,
not verifying, but possibly evidence light evidence in support of a hypothesis that there was something circulating.
not exactly. So I would say I see no reason to believe this happened, but if we take it as a hypothetical, what if it had happened? Would we expect this pattern? Yes, you
That we
would.
do see. Yep.
Yeah. But no, I don't see any evidence, any affirmative evidence of this at all. But yes, you could take it as a hypothesis, and then you would want.
What would we look for though, as affirmative evidence or falsifying? Really, although background. Antibodies in members of the population that didn't appear to have.
Yes, you would want to know that that the low rates were the result of immunity, but B, we also know
But
that
but that evidence may fade because we see antibody titers fading so quickly with this damn virus.
Well, but the thing is, what we have is immunological memory, and so the antibodies aren't durable, but the memory cells are. And so,
Yep.
In any case, you would expect to see evidence of that. I'm not sure we would call it even an epidemic if, let's say, it was close to asymptomatic. But in any case, you would expect to see evidence of that pathogen. And the problem is that we know that a lot of things, there's even cross-reactivity between things like cold viruses and COVID. So that's a much bigger gap. So we would want to see something narrower than that. And as far as I know, there's no evidence whatsoever.
All right.
We also, we effectively have a point source in Wuhan, so that marshals against it.
This is a question from the Discord server this week, where if you are on the Discord server, as I imagine many of the people who are sticking around for these private Q&As or these super chat Q&As are, but you get access to the Discord server by joining one of our Patreons, and then they vote on their favorite question for the week and ask it. This week's question is, for the majority of our evolutionary history, survival was a challenge. This seems to have built us to endure hardship and struggle, almost need it. How much does the lack of struggle required to survive in modern society contribute to current issues, mental health, ideologies, polarization, and how can we guide people towards positive struggle, like perhaps mastering a craft or getting a PhD or running a marathon?
I love it when questions answer themselves.
I know. A lot of the questions on the Discord server do that. They're so thoughtful and careful and have the Q and the A both in there, right?
Yep.
So yes, but the question that remains is how. So it seemed to be asking, would it be useful to guide people towards positive struggle? Yes, and how do we do that is maybe a harder societal question.
Well,
I guess you start young.
The thing is, yes, you start young, and it's actually in some ways the same thing that we were addressing at the top with respect to analogies to evolution. So one of the things I would say is there is a very tight connection between development and evolution. Many of the patterns are quite analogous. And what you want is to provide a pathway that rewards the behavior that ultimately manifests in being good at struggling against things worth struggling against. And, to the extent that and this is in part why we end up so different from each other, is that we happen to have experiences early on in which something really rewarding happens on some channel. And that may be total luck the first time or the second time that it happens, but it may result in you feeling like, hey, I wonder if I have an aptitude for that thing. And then you pursue it, and then you get frustrated when it doesn't work. And so you get better and better. And so the point is, for those of us who educate, or for those of us with kids, the question is, can you architect the experience that causes the thing that turns out awesome in the end to be rewarding along the way enough that you stick to it and you get frustrated in a useful way rather than a dumb way? And
how do you create an internal motivation system, an internal reward system, rather than what of course the government and the pharmaceutical companies and the media and advertisers and everyone who sells stuff wants, which is to maintain an external motivating system, which rewards with carrots and other delicious things and punishes with sticks.
Yes, less delicious sticks than carrots.
Unless you're a dog. No, carrots are still more delicious than
Yes,
sticks.
you're right.
Yeah.
It's really like a flavored stick
Mhm.
at some level. But
Yeah. Carrot.
yeah. The so I do think there's something to the useful frustration versus stupid frustration.
For sure.
And I know in my own case, the object that doesn't work, I get frustrated that it doesn't work, and I feel that I am obligated to figure out if I can determine what it is that doesn't work and get it to work, which then gives me presumably a hit of dopamine.
Mhm.
I feel the same way about photography, especially nature photography, where every aside from those rare dumb luck instances, the machine, the camera is a bundle of constraints, and the event or the creature doing its thing is an opportunity. And there's definitely a sense of like, can I figure out enough of the puzzle to actually get an image that I'd be interested in showing somebody into the machine, and then there's what I never thought I would care about, really. The change in the way cameras work has radically changed the puzzles that you have to solve as a photographer. Some things that we used to care a hell of a lot about, there's no reason to care at all. And other things, are now obsessions. And so anyway, there's something about a love of puzzle solving and then finding the puzzles that work. And one of the things I worry about is that because that thing is liable to have been rewarded evolutionarily, we are built to find our passions and to figure out how to solve problems in them. But what happens when somebody comes up with a junk food solution to that thing, and it's like, oh, this video game is really visually compelling, and you know what, there are actual people in it that you can banter back and forth with as you game, right? And it's like, wow, that's everything I want. But the point is, it doesn't train you to do anything useful. It doesn't train you to solve problems in some useful way. And so the point is, it's all well, what do I really know? I don't game, but I think it's all opportunity cost, and the opportunity cost comes in the form of all of the things you could have trained yourself to do that later on would still be meaningful, whereas a game is going to disappear, and who cares that you're good at some game that doesn't exist anymore?
We could say a lot more about all of this question, but let's move on.
Yep.
After watching your discussion with Jamie Wheel, I'm wondering if you are still pursuing a Unity platform for 2022 or 2024.
Unity is alive and well and in an invisible form. We are going to reboot it. It is not, however, inherently about elections. It is about the fact that there is, in general, policy that serves our collective well-being that is not finding a place in governance because our governance is so fucking corrupt, if you don't mind my saying so. So the point is, start thinking about Unity more broadly. Yes, winning elections is cool and strategies for doing so is cool, but more broadly, think of all of the things that we would do if we were smart that we're not doing because we've got corrupt leaders. And those things are really the heart of Unity. And I think, frankly, it's vastly more interesting than a narrow, electorally focused version of that thing. So anyway, let's think more broadly, and let's have fun fighting the good fight.
Cool. What is your excuse me? What is your philosophy on medical care for pets? Oh, wait a minute. There were a few questions that were in two parts, and okay, maybe this wasn't a two-part one. What is your philosophy on medical care for pets? That is, cost aside, how do you evaluate whether to subject a pet to surgery or medical treatment?
Well, you want to go or should I go?
You can go. I'll
right.
add. I mean, we've done a lot of medical care for our pets.
Yes, we have. I would say this is a tough one. Because, the philosophy is what you're asking about, and that's a good question. I would say at some level, I see you as taking on the responsibility of a creature worthy of care, and that in effect, because they are pets and because they don't live as long as people, you are hopefully in the position of taking them on, presumably when they're young in general, and seeing them through their life. And basically, I think the right thing to do is to attempt to make sure that bad things don't happen to them, and that if they are jeopardized by pathology, that you make the right decision rather than a decision that is overly focused on your own horror at losing your pet. So, keeping your pet alive is great when you can do it, and it's just a matter of money that you happen to have. On the other hand, I have to say that a couple times that we have had to put animals to sleep, to euthanize them. I don't love the euphemism. I don't know why I used it, but I have had the sense of like, this is incredibly painful, but there is also a sense of, I took care of you, right to the end. I was there at the moment that you left, and and that means that nothing terrible happened to you in the meantime. And I do think, as you and I have talked endlessly about, something awful has happened to veterinary care. It's become predatory, the way so-called death care is predatory. That basically, because the emotions are so heightened, there's a business opportunity. And somehow we have to find veterinarians who will help us make the right decision rather than do what they do, which is A, feed us a lot of stuff that's probably not good for the animal and probably not necessary, and B, push us towards intervening to prolong life when that doesn't make sense to do.
Yeah. I'm reminded of one of our cats whom we ultimately did euthanize at the age of 17 or 18. I don't remember how old Sasha was.
Yep.
But within a year or so of the end of her life, so she was already quite an old cat, she had white ears and she got cancer in her ears.
Got melanoma or its equivalent on both ears.
And the vets wanted to lop off her ears.
Yeah.
And we said, no, we're not going to have this elderly cat whom we love live the last probably months of her life without ears.
Yeah, without ears, and being horrifying to people who encountered her. And it just didn't make any sense because she was, at the end of her life, one way or the other.
Yeah.
So anyway, I would say you do have obligations to your pet. And, nobody likes the idea of people who treat pets like objects and get rid of them at the point they're inconvenient. That's horrifying.
Or abandon them when they move. I mean, it's just really, really a good indication of someone that you don't want to be dependent on for anything.
Right.
People who do that.
But, there has to be a balance struck. And really the thing is, give your pet an excellent life. And it's actually, in some ways, I think it's the most marvelous gift you can give a creature is a life that's well taken care of, that in which they have interesting things to do, but they don't have to worry about anything big like starvation or predation or anything like that. And, we don't even give this to our kids. Like, you raise kids and they face trials and tribulations, and that's part of life. But
they have to become independent in the way that cats don't.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Next question. As one who uses anonymity for political effect myself, that Antifa dude in the anonymous-y video is tactically effective but morally appalling, using people's ire for Wheeler to do more harm than good, not realizing he's ushering in a fascist response. So no question there, but an apt comment.
Yeah, I totally agree with this. Yeah. And, I think it's it is important to recognize that as much as that looked like anonymous, the message was not like anonymous. Yeah. One of the problems, and I think this is a problem that is true of anonymous, is because of the nature of anonymous. It's a non-organization, which in effect liberates anybody to put on that mask and deliver the anonymous message. There's nothing that can say, hey, that one doesn't speak for us, because what is us, right?
Yep.
So that's a problem. And in this case, we now see what that problem does is that somebody can use the style of anonymous to threaten the mayor of Portland, and there's no one to say, oh, that's not a real anonymous message, because who's to say one way or the other?
Yeah.
But yes, it is a serious problem.
Hello. A question that I've not seen talked about is, if the Wuhan lab was studying the COVID virus, why does it appear that they've been a non-player in terms of vaccine or other useful information?
Because they've been hiding under their desks,
Yeah.
trying to dodge responsibility.
Yeah. They only acknowledge that they have a virus that is related. And I don't think they even claim to have had pulled it out of cold storage or however it's stored.
No, I mean, in fact, there were
Yeah.
many claims made along the way that there was no virus left, that their ancestor was reduced to a sequence, and
Yeah.
there's nothing in their freezer. And the thing is, the obvious thing to do would have been to
Look in their freezer.
yeah, to let
Among other
somebody look at
things.
their, well,
Yes.
of course, they could well have disappeared.
Yes.
But yeah, their absence from the
Right.
scene is conspicuous. On the other hand, I can say, if they had entered into this conversation about vaccines and what to do, I can imagine a healthy dose of skepticism directed their way. And so one can imagine, let's say that the Wuhan Institute is innocent, right? One can still imagine that they would not have been in a good position to contribute to this effort and might have sidelined themselves on that basis.
Yep. I can't help but think of the perverse incentive for big pharma and tech oligarchs like Bill to be incentivized by disasters. It's not hard to make the leap between gain of function and capital gains. Call me a conspiracy gal. Be a lot more easy, and this is second question from the same person or comment. Be a lot more easy to trust the CDC if they didn't switch pandemics between COVID-19, racism, and climate change. Color me skeptical.
Yeah. We are obviously in the same boat, and the problem is all of these things.
We need a functional CDC.
We need a functional CDC. We need functional governance. And, back to the question about unity, it's the corruption, stupid.
Yeah.
That's what's causing this to all be so difficult, which doesn't mean you wouldn't be left with a very difficult problem if the corruption wasn't there. But the point is, the corruption means this is not going to be solved in our interest.
Yeah.
Right. It's going to be solved behind closed doors according to things that, we're all too naive to understand, unfortunately.
Yeah. This is just another comment, tongue in cheek. Taking social justification for vaccination to its logical conclusion, shouldn't you not vaccinate? Because if you're healthy, you won't get COVID-19, then you don't need it. And if you die, it's one less unhealthy person that society would have had to take care of in the future.
Boy, that's the route to herd immunity. Reducto ad absurdum.
Yep, there it is. It is. Last time I traveled to Entebbe, I'm sure I'm butchering that name, in Uganda, I had to show evidence on my WHO vaccination card of yellow fever inoculation upon entry. Why are people acting like this passport is a new thing? I actually talked about this somewhat extensively on Bridget Fettis's podcast a couple weeks ago. So I'm not going to go through it here, but basically, one of the answers is, a few things. Being asked to be vaccinated to travel someplace that is not your home to protect the lives of the people who already live there is very different from being told that you may lose rights and privileges to live in your own home the way you've been living before. That said, legitimate pandemic does potentially change some of that thinking. And the yellow fever vaccination is a decades-old traditional vaccine with literally decades of health and safety data. Safety and efficacy data behind it, which makes it a very different vaccine. And this was my point actually to Bridget as well. I had to require all of my students to have yellow fever and some other, but yellow fever vaccination in particular. That was the only one that I had to get, and we had to get, and then I had to require my students to get when I would take them deep into the Amazon. There's literally a military checkpoint where you show your card, and if you don't have it, you get turned back. Frankly, the responsibility for you as someone coming into a space to help keep the local population safe is a very different situation.
Yeah, it is a very different situation. In effect, you have the right to make rules for people coming in.
Of course,
that
that's what
make
borders
sense.
are.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, I would say also I don't know anything about the business behind the yellow fever vaccine, but it's such a tiny number of people who get that shot every year, especially as a result of passports.
And I don't know about vaccines, but if they're patented the same way, it's literally been in production for many, many decades. So it must be out of patent.
I got it as a kid.
Well, no, I know it's been in use since I can't remember now. It's been a couple of weeks, but it's like 1930s, 1940s.
Yeah,
it's way before you were a kid. So my point is, I don't know if patents work differently for vaccines or what, but I don't think that there's a huge profit to be made.
Right. I don't think there's a huge profit to be made because you'll have lots of manufacturers. And the one thing I don't know is whether or not the yellow vaccine is still the yellow fever vaccine. Sounds like you have established that it's the same vaccine.
Yeah.
So anyway, perverse incentives aren't there. History of safety of the vaccine is clear.
Yeah.
And so anyway, and it's, it's a requirement to go to X, Y, or Z place. I should say
being required to carry papers to walk around your own country. That is, there's a lot of bad historical precedent there. Yeah. And it's not the same as being forced to have a driver's license to drive or to have a yellow fever vaccination card to enter, Ecuador or, whatever. Well, it's just not the same.
And we have, clear evidence of perverse incentives and a massive profit to be made for requiring everybody. I would also point, if you'll go back to one of our early live streams, we talked about this issue of what I called monkeying with the baseline.
Oh, yeah.
And by forcing everyone to get vaccinated, they are also monkeying with the baseline with respect to our ability to establish what the consequences actually are. That in effect, if you did have universal vaccination, then you don't have a control group. So it won't be quite universal. But if they can get close, then it also means we can't quite test the question of what happened.
Yeah. Two more, I think, sort of follow-ups to that question from the same person, or just comments. Boy, it's actually two different people with slightly different initials. So that person says, I'd rather roll the dice with my Pfizer shots than get COVID and see those long-term health effects. They don't seem awesome. And then follows up with, love Bret and Heather. I have a science undergrad and social science master's. I'm now a manager. My job is making many critical decisions based on incomplete information. It's an art and a science. And my gut says, just take the vax.
So I would point out that it's very hard to know what to make of this result that you just told me about for the first time today. I think you just ran across it, this result that the spike protein in and of itself creates damage.
Yeah, it's a brand new
in
result.
A model organism. Now, it's possible that is an anomaly. It's possible that the paper doesn't mean what we think it means, or that it has to do with the model organism and not people. But if it is true, and I will say it has the ring of truth, because it's not only that it does damage, it does exactly the kind of damage that we see that is so anomalous with COVID.
And it's consistent with it being vascular disease and not primarily respiratory.
Right, exactly. Mm-hmm. So if that is the case, then think about what you're saying, right? You're saying that a healthy person should take a dose of a pathological vaccine. So I'm not saying that this is the case. I'm saying if it is the case, then a vaccine that creates spike protein that itself induces damage is an acceptable risk to avoid the same kind of damage from the virus. Now, I'm not discounting how serious this virus damage is. It's very serious, and it has been practically a mantra since the beginning of these live streams. People are underrating the danger of COVID because the death rate, the case fatality rate is low, right? They are underrating the damage because it's years of life lost from the damage to major organs that we see regularly in these cases. But that the vaccine is not, I think people have this sense about, if I get away with it in the short term, then I got away with it. And that's just not how this works with a complex system like this. So I hear you. You may be right, but you need to leave open the possibility that you're not right, and that in fact a vaccine that itself does significant damage to the body is it's not a free pass.
Yeah. Next question. Hello. A friend of mine loves biology and has gone back to college to major in it, but she's not sure what she can actually do with that degree. Do you have any advice or resources for bio students in that position?
Yeah, geez.
Yeah.
I remember back in the before times when you and I were professors, and the questions I liked least were questions in which people wanted either advice on continuing their education into graduate school or careers that might be based on such things, because the world has gone crazy and it takes advantage of graduate students who end up doing the teaching of the university for cheap, and there are no jobs for them when they get out, and it leaves a lot of people bitter and with a degree they can't use, having spent some of their potentially most productive years doing something they wouldn't have done if they realized there wasn't going to be a profession at the end of it. So,
Well, and you're talking about grad school. This is someone going back to major to get a baccalaureate, a bachelor's degree, which opens up even fewer things, except that to the degree that a college degree is still worth anything.
yeah.
I think a degree in a science is going to be increasingly better regarded as a degree in some other fields, because it at least demonstrates that you have an ability to, think logically and mathematically sometimes, hopefully,
Hopefully it still does.
Hopefully, right? And I guess with regard to anything more precise, like we don't really, in part because the future is not going to look a lot like the past. But also biology is huge. And really, if she's interested in ecology versus cellular biology versus genetics versus molecular biology, evolution, it's, all of the possible career paths would be different.
Yep. But I think the analysis you came up with is right, which is if you're going because you need a college degree, then you might as well study something real and interesting to you. And biology would be as good, or from our perspective, better than most. So if you think about it as two separate things, what you're doing is you're getting the degree. What are you getting the degree in? Something that you're fascinated by, then it makes a kind of sense.
Mm-hmm. So, next question. So, could the risk of COVID-19 be the reason for passports and contact tracing to protect the industry from a potential media fallout that would be caused by mRNA risks? To invent the narrative with variants. Not totally sure what that means.
Yeah, I don't quite get it either, but I am concerned about I'm concerned about what we are not told about consequences that people have. I'm concerned about being tracked.
Yeah.
And all sorts of things that if we lived in a world where these things were done functionally and honorably, I wouldn't be worried about it and I'd be in favor of it. But
yeah. In Maya Forstadter's appeal, the defense put forward that society has moved on from biological reality. What other realities do you think we will move on from in the name of postmodernism? Oh my God. So I have not been following the appeal much. I think it's going well. This is Maya Forstadter, who was fired for believing in the reality of sex and for saying so. And the original case found that they had just cause because it was, I don't know, I don't even remember and this is UK, so I know even less about the legal system, but somehow she was in the wrong for recognizing reality. So this appeal, I think, is I thought it was already over. Gosh, I wish I knew. It's awesome. Anyway, the question here is, the defense actually argued that society has moved on from biological reality. So I'm gobsmacked.
Yes.
Yes.
Gobsmacked. It's another one of those Texas expressions. Yeah, so let's put it this way. I mean, we've already found ourselves in the place where if it is unthinkable that we will move past some realization, then we will move past it. 2 + 2 = 4
Right.
is pretty much an announcement
Yep.
that we have hit bottom. And
you got people out there actually believing they're different species.
right. And so, I mean, in essence, what you have to imagine, and again, we've just been saying this for what feels like forever, but it's, a year or a little more. The thing is, people who believe this crap or pretend they believe this crap are hobbling themselves in competition with anybody who can figure out how to keep doing the reality thing. So those people are going to win. Those people could be China. It could be anyone. And so the point is, we will very soon rediscover the reality of reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is coming one way or the other, whether that's through the hegemony of others or the extinction of the species or whatever it is. But, nature bats last, as it were, and you can only dodge realism for so long.
Well, I guess actually that feels to me like a good segue to this next question, which is...
The only good segue is a dead segue, and I say that with respect to personal electric vehicles.
You know you're not helping, right?
It's becoming apparent, yes.
Well, it's a bad time.
Glad we finally got here.
Okay. See, they're not obviously linked, and I was trying to make a connection, and you're introducing
I stepped on your connection.
Rando vehicles that don't even exist. I mean, do they exist anymore?
Sure.
And it's spelled differently. You know that, right?
I do not know that.
Yeah, the two segues.
Okay.
I didn't actually know that for a while.
Is there a way to get from one
person.
spelling to the other? That would be in keeping with the term.
Yeah, you can go the first three letters, and then you just get blocked.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. The next question is, Harris only speaks the truth at the moment that serves her. She ran on outreach to this exact ilk. Her and her staffers contributed funds to bail for protesters. Her principles are a weather vane blown by ego and greed. And this is basically what you were arguing, and I had this, naive optimism. And before I read that question, I was actually going to say, yeah, you know what, you're right. I'm actually surprised that I was hopeful in light of what I have seen from her in the past. But I think actually the reason that I do take it as hopeful in one way is, politicians will politic, that she's going to do what she does. I would love it if there was actually a total change of heart, but I don't expect that from her. So that's not what I was hopeful about. Like, oh, maybe she's becoming, the vice president we all want and deserve. I don't expect that to be the case. I thought that it could mean, and this is consistent with the idea that Carville said something very similar this week, that actually they're seeing the writing on the wall, and that basically the Democratic Party does have the capacity to pull the ripcord on wokeness, potentially. They actually do. And so, we're going to move on from biological reality in the name of postmodernism. At some point, some people with power are going to realize exactly what you just said. Well, we're just going to lose then. If we keep playing this game, we're just going to lose. And the sooner people who are wielding power see that, cynical though that seeing is, the more likely we can turn this around.
Well, I would not want to be those
on a segue
DNC stalwarts at the point that the army of people with NPR tote bags realize that they've been had by a bunch of people cynically selling them wokeness, because they're going to get a thwacking of some kind.
No, they're very agreeable.
Yeah, they're too agreeable. But yeah, I don't know. I think the question asker has it exactly right. The way to model these people's behavior and predict it correctly is to imagine that they're completely cynical. And then I would just add to that they're also fools and therefore don't understand.
Yes, but again, you're focusing on the individual, and I was saying that my hopefulness was about the societal level response, that we need enough people to be recognizing this to turn this around.
Right.
Imagine that I don't care about Kamala Harris,
but
right?
Here's the problem. They have empowered this thing. And
who?
The DNC
sure.
and its partners.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, my claim from the beginning has been they don't believe this crap, that they are
granted.
So, but the other thing I've said is they don't have the power to control it. So watching them wake up is predicted. This is a little earlier than I would have expected, but maybe this is.
But you really think they don't have an ability to move the dial?
I think these people haven't understood the game theory that has driven this thing this far, and so they've basically thrown gasoline on this fire. And at the point that they realize that they're not so happy with it, they're going to get.
All they've got is more gasoline.
All they've got is more gas. Yep.
Well, I hope you're wrong.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah. Did you catch Josh Rogin on Joe Rogan? Lab leak, not only possible, but probable given the huge smoking gun of the cover-up. Thoughts? Feel vindicated? Keep up the good work. Much love from France. I did not see Josh Rogin on.
I saw that he was on. I did not see it. Vindicated is a weird term.
Yeah.
I think the thing that I feel is, okay, can we play this through so that we're not in this situation next time? Right? The fact that we managed to get lab leak to the point that it can be discussed in polite company was incredibly dangerous, and it was incredibly difficult, and it was unlikely to work, right? We managed because there were a lot of very clever people who had the chops to navigate the evidence. There were a lot of us who were willing to talk about it in public. This one did not come out the way they usually do, but the point is, that force that wants to tell us what to think is there. It's screwed up in this case. Can we now extrapolate to the other stuff that it's clearly lying to us about, right? Which doesn't make any of this clear. My point in the first part of the podcast was that what you need is a huge budget for nuance in all of these cases, because it doesn't marshal towards one team or the other. It marshals towards these intermediate, ambiguous, gray as can be answers. But the next time we're not going to get so lucky, and let's just learn from this case.
Yeah, I guess I would just picking up on your focusing on that word vindicated. I think it's a dangerous word to be thinking about in this landscape, precisely because if lab leak turns out to be the actual origin of SARS-CoV-2, it is true that it was something that you and we were talking about early. We should have been interested in and willing to talk about that early if it was simply a possibility, no matter how likely it seemed to us or how likely it actually was. And so you want people who are actually good faith, careful thinkers to be saying this thing is a possibility and that thing's a possibility all the time, and have, in fact, depending on how many hypotheses they are talking about for any given explanation, mostly not have those hypotheses be borne out. Like that is what discerning between hypotheses is about. It's the very rare situation where you have two and only two, and there's one that's being promoted, and the black sheep hypothesis is actually the true one, and you're there talking about the black sheep hypothesis. That's a super rare situation. That's not even descriptive of what is going on here. So you want all the possible hypotheses on the table. And it is certainly true that with all the perverse incentives that we know there to be in the world right now, that there will always be one or two or many that aren't really being discussed. And you want everyone, but people like us will tend to be those saying, there's also this possibility, even if we don't even think it's true. But that's a possibility. Let us establish what the complete solution set of possibilities are. And if those possibilities that we've now added to what we think is a complete solution set of possibilities don't end up being right, that doesn't mean we were wrong to bring them up. That means that those hypotheses weren't correct.
Right.
It has nothing to do with being vindicated or not. It has to do with we need to get all of the possible hypotheses on the table so we can talk freely.
I totally agree with this. And, again, it's not the most intuitive thing in the world, but the ability to formally put hypotheses on the table. And, in general, we do have an opinion about what hypotheses we think are most likely. It has no implication whatsoever for whether you've put them on the table correctly. You've said what the predictions would be if they were true, and then you find out if they are.
Yeah.
But I would also, just to wrap this up, point out something interesting is going on here, because the lab leak turns out to be probable. We were able to see that back in
April, May of last year.
The vaccine looks like it has risks. This is brand new, but this issue of the spike protein, the vaccine appears to have risks beyond what one would expect based on the PR. Masks don't need to be worn outdoors. Like, why are we getting these things when everybody else is way behind on them, right? That has to do with the freedom to just simply do the analysis, right?
Yes.
So the fact that you have virtually nobody who has the ability to do the analysis based on, their training in history and science, and the freedom to do the analysis based on the career that they hold is killing us.
Yes.
The perverse incentives are all over the goddamn place.
Yes.
And the fact is, if you want to be healthy and, act in your interest and society's interest, then, you need more people who are free to talk.
Yeah.
Right. And, that's the thing we should really be shocked at is how
Yes.
few people are in a position to do it.
Yes. 2 more questions here, and then we'll move on to this hour's questions. If it were up to you two, what would you propose should happen in India right now? Should only the vulnerable take the vaccine? Doesn't this guarantee the continuous spread and mutation of the virus? I don't have an answer to this. I don't know a tremendous amount about what's going on in India, in part because I have not looked at it carefully because I know there will be so much missing, and I'm not in a position to figure out what's missing, which makes seeing what is being portrayed to us even harder to decipher when you don't even know what the holes are.
Yeah, I must say I'm resistant to answering questions like this because, in a sense, my feeling is, were we in charge? We would not have gotten here because we would have taken this much more seriously much earlier. And the fact I don't really want responsibility for, there's something where you're drifting towards a waterfall, right? And there are clever things to do early in that process, and the number of clever things there are to do gets smaller and smaller the closer you get to the waterfall. And then there's a point at which you can't escape the waterfall. And the last thing I want is, okay, what would you do at that point? And it's like, well, I would
probably die.
I wouldn't have gotten this close to the waterfall.
Yeah.
Right. I would have paid attention to it a lot earlier, and I would have been a lot more careful.
Yep.
So I appreciate the question. I think it's a fair question. And frankly, I hope really good people are on it.
Yeah.
But I would like to know more about what is going on in India and why. Which I don't think is straightforward. And I know that we can't have that conversation based on the reception that Geert Vanderbush has received. Now, I'm not saying that is what's happening in India because the vaccination rate I don't think is high enough for that to be the explanation, though it could be. I'm not even sure it's on a population basis that we would do that analysis because really it's a question of absolute numbers and rare variants arising. But in any case, there's a lot to be thought.
That's right.
I would love a room full of well-informed, free people to have that discussion in a place we could overhear it.
Okay, one last question from this hour. Also something I don't know about. The New Yorker published a game-changing UFO feature yesterday. More ex-DoD officials, Department of Defense officials, have made comments suggesting that aliens exist on Earth, but outside of the range of human perception. Thoughts? I don't know anything about this.
There are none behind you.
You can't tell. You're human, right?
I assumed they were just standing in our blind spots. That's what I thought was being suggested, but maybe not.
Usually beyond the range of human perception has already factored in the blind spots.
Yeah. So let's put it this way.
Do you know anything about this article? I didn't even know the article existed.
Well, my sense
seems
is
like something I should know
it's
exists.
one of a series of things that has emerged recently that suggests the military is taking this UFO stuff seriously.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. How do I not know this?
Well, but I mean, remember, UFO just means unidentified. Aliens is a step beyond that. Let's put it this way. I kind of hope that it's aliens because if it's aliens, maybe we're saved and maybe we're doomed. What? No, honestly, I've thought about, as you find out that you have no power to affect the ship of fools that is headed towards the waterfall, you start thinking, well, what might work? And one thing that might work is aliens who know what the fuck is going on, and we could talk to them about it. And, at least it might just put a shock to the system, and we would start to realize where we are, who we are, what it means, what matters. And we could, team up on this COVID thing and stop.
I'm in.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
All right. So I hope it's aliens, and I hope they don't want to kill us. I think there's no real reason they would.
It's a nice planet.
It was pretty good, but
No, it's a great planet.
For what? I mean, it's a
aliens.
Good planet. Oh, I guess.
Yeah.
No, I think the thing is, we're talking about aliens who.
I mean, it's in our Goldilocks zone. I don't know if it's in their Goldilocks zone, but if they're already here, it probably is.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But my sense is we're talking about sufficient technological sophistication that.
You don't think they arrived by intergalactic spore?
I think that if they're here, it's a result of some pretty good tech, which means they probably don't need anything from us.
No, I heard tack. I imagine them like tacking through the galaxy.
That'd be cool on the solar winds.
Yeah,
I like it.
Yeah, but between star systems, there's not a lot of solar winds in most of that space.
Not a lot of solar winds, and of course we have to give Eric his due.
Do we?
I think we do.
I don't know for what yet.
Because his point is we got to get off this rock.
True.
And getting off this rock may not involve what people think. And I'm still, I must say, a super skeptic of the fact that a physical possibility of crossing large amounts of space without actually going through it, and therefore, beating the speed of light without going faster than light. Though. It's a great idea. Mm-hmm. But let's put it this way. If there are aliens hovering in our blind spot, then they probably got here.
They're not in our blind spot. We just can't perceive them.
I know. Different. I'm using it metaphorically now.
Yeah, but it's different.
I'm enjoying the idea of aliens in all of our blind spots.
In our species level blind spot.
In our species level blind spot. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The bees know.
The bees know. Yeah. So in any case, if they're here, they probably got here in some way. And it just drives Eric crazy if we say faster than light, because he imagines that we all think that means going faster than light rather than getting from A to B. Faster than light can go from A to B, which is what you mean, Eric. But if they're here, then they probably did it, in which case Eric might not be crazy on this point.
That's another reason you want the aliens to be here. It's a failure to falsify Eric's hypothesis.
Yes, and
Eric's theory of everything.
It would be an extreme failure of falsification of Eric's hypothesis of everything, which would then be a theory.
There it is.
All right, that'd
excellent.
Be cool.
Good. Did it.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, we're going to answer some questions from the next
We're just about an hour, which was enough time to get from Alpha Centauri to here. Were you able to pull those two?
That takes nothing.
Nothing.
None of it takes anything.
None of it takes anything.
Distances are nothing.
Yeah, they're passé.
I think they're future as well.
By the way, yesterday I was picking up Toby at school, and I was thinking school is now old school.
It's true.
Old school is new again, I guess.
I realized the other day with him, and this will be true for our deputy producer for a different number. This will be true for many people with children, that because of the timing and the lockdowns and the fact that school has only just barely partially begun to resume in person for Toby, when he was 14 years old, he had no school in person. He basically saw no one. And the same is true for our then 16-year-old deputy producer, Zachary. An entire year.
I'm confused. I thought Zach was the producer and Fairfax was the deputy producer.
Who did I just call someone deputy producer?
You called Zach the deputy producer.
No. I'm
Zach,
sorry, Zach.
You have not been demoted.
No,
Don't
you've
worry.
not been demoted. In fact, I'm promoting you after this as an apology. Yeah.
Yeah, we can make him benevolent overlord of the DarkHorse Podcast.
No, I think we just double up his title. You're going to be the producer.
Oh.
Okay, good. Mm-hmm.
And we'll make you the head of the Department of Redundancy Department.
A recent ant invasion made me curious, presumably. Is there an organism or superorganism to which, if you found out it was cohabitating with you and wanted your house, you would cede the habitat? it.
Yeah.
I need to know this.
Grizzly bears. If you find yourself cohabitating with a grizzly bear and it decides it wants the house
not
to
under
its...
duress. This is seed. It's not. If it's under duress, that's not seeding.
I would make whatever allowances.
Well, I wouldn't. I'm standing up to them.
You're standing up to the grizzly bear, are
Yeah.
you? I'm not sure that's a good idea.
Just look up to them, but
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, willingly seed the house.
Well, but here's something though, which you probably won't know unless you spent time in the neotropics. Our very first field season together as would-be researchers in grad school, we had spent a summer traveling around Central America already, but we were at a very tiny field station in Sarapiquí in northeastern Costa Rica, which was basically a house that was run by a small family, a woman and a man and their young child, and then they had rooms for researchers, and it was just us and a few other grad students and our professor, and it was associated with a smallish piece of forest. At one point, the army ants were coming, and I don't remember. Do you remember? What are you doing?
I'm looking for a neotropical companion.
Oh, okay. But I need your attention.
Yes, you got it. Undivided, except for my looking for the relevant book on the shelf there.
Oh my God, it's been a long day.
It has been.
Do you remember how it was that we came to know that the army ants were coming? Like when you were in the forest, you sometimes run into the army ants and you're like, okay, I get it. I see it. I'm just going to steer clear. But I don't remember if it was one of us, one of the grad students, or John, our professor, or indeed Lavinia, or I can't remember the dude who actually ran the field station. I remember the woman's name.
His name is...
Anyway, I don't remember who it was. And from how much of a distance it became clear that, okay, actually the army ants are coming and they're probably coming here. And Lavinia, I remember the woman, the wife, basically said, no, this is great. When they come, it's cleaning. They clean. So we just, you gotta clear out anything that you don't want them to clean. And because if it's organic, they'll get rid of it. And they might move stuff away if it's light and they just feel like it's in the way. But as long as you can basically clear out your stuff and leave it to them, you come back to a gleaming kitchen and bathrooms, and the army ants just come through like a wave. And I don't know how long it takes for a smallish house, but less than a day.
Oh yeah,
much less than a day.
Hours.
And so I would temporarily seed a house if I had one in the neotropics to army ants,
Sure,
but not grizzly bears.
All right. Well, so in order to make the story good, I think we should say that we were alerted to the approach of the army ants by the antbirds. That would be appropriate, biologically accurate.
Yeah, but I don't think we were.
I'm sure we weren't. But anyway,
but we can make that claim here. No one will be the wiser.
They'll never know.
Nope. No, it was the antbirds.
Yeah, it was the antbirds, which we could recognize at 50 paces.
With the help of an ornithologist and a field guide.
There you go. So that actually happened several times on BCI too when I was there, and I was looking for a neotropical companion, which I believe describes exactly that phenomenon.
Neotropical companion or tropical nature?
No, I think it's neotropical companion describes it.
I'm
on
sure
BCI.
It's right out there, but I'm not going to get up and
but
walk
anyway,
off screen now like I do during our private Q&As.
It happens every now and again, and there's just nothing to be done about it.
Yeah,
and it's not terrible if you just let them go. Yeah,
most of the stuff that if I found them in my house, I would be pleased with. I wouldn't want to seed the house. I would want to come to an agreement. Like, if it turns out that kinkajous were living in the rafters, it'd be like, that's cool. Can we potty train you?
Right.
And
no,
you can stay.
I mean, this is more or less what one does with children.
They're usually not in the rafters, but sometimes.
Yeah. That happens every now and again.
Usually, at least mothers aren't surprised to find the arrival of the children.
Right. It's hard to be caught that off guard.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, you discover them in your house and
I know I wasn't
you make
surprised.
your peace with it. Well,
maybe you were.
Yeah, that surprise.
As a bat biologist, how do you feel? God, the questions this week.
Oh, no.
As a bat biologist, how do you feel about the term sky puppies for these critters in parallel to sea puppies for seals and land puppies for dogs?
I ain't never heard that term.
I don't. I think.
Well, here's the problem.
I think it's being made up.
Yeah, I think it is being made up.
Yes.
The old world fruit bats, the Pteropodidae, are known as flying foxes, a reference to their dog-like appearance, but they are much more.
It's a reference to their fox-like appearance, isn't it? They're not
Foxes
called
being
flying dogs. Being caniforms.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
They're dogs.
Yeah, they're canids. Okay, yeah. Fair enough.
And most...
Objection retracted.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Most bats do not look that much like dogs. And in fact, we have none of those theropods in the New World.
Nope.
So I'm skeptical. We do describe Maddie as like a land seal.
A land seal.
And I must say, seals do strike me as very dog-like.
Wait, and in Jamaica,
yes,
the names for bats and moths.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Moths are bats, and bats are rat bats.
There it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. You learned when you were working as Bob Triver's field assistant many years ago in Jamaica. All right. Noses look expensive. Why do they keep looking so particular even in people who've moved to new environments or mixed? Why haven't small noses become dominant?
Who says they haven't? I mean, it's hardly a rostrum.
She's talking, this is Echo, about the variation within people, not compared to dogs.
Why do people with comparatively small noses not outcompete those with comparatively large?
Well, not even not compete, but just like, why do you end up with lineage level, like, why is a Roman nose and like East Asian noses and Jewish noses and like,
Okay. So first of all, I would say there's a lot going on in the nose that we don't think about. There is the recapture of energy that would be lost to the environment on exhaling. And in fact, if you look at something like walruses, you will find an amazingly well-architected countercurrent exchange mechanism that basically takes heat back from the exhaled air before it is lost to the environment. Why? Because calories are so expensive to procure that preserving them is as good as finding them.
Dogs and cats have this as well. In fact, when you do, you look at a cat skull and you see, it's actually at the skeletal level, right? And it's just like this incredible high surface area to volume of the bony structures in the nose. They're then covered with all of these sensory tissue,
right,
and neurological tissue.
And I believe there's going to be some immunological function. That there's a certain amount of perusing the environment for antigens worth knowing about and things like this. There is, So anyway, I think the basic answer is noses are doing more than you think. It's not just a snorkel. You can get a certain amount from that.
It's the turbinates, I think. If you can't really see it all that well, but because in part because it's broken off. Where's my camera? But you can see some of what looks like spongy stuff inside the rostrum there. That's actually bony. Otherwise, it wouldn't still be here, and this would smell terrible. So yeah, that's true. Certainly in all the carnivores, I believe, and I don't know, like what a mouse. Probably in a mouse too. I could actually have some skulls, but not right here.
Yeah,
this is the only.
Yeah, I don't remember. But in any case, I think the basic answer, Echo, is that there's a lot going on in the nose. It is sort of underappreciated how much biological complexity there is there. And there's also stuff like it does allow you to go underwater without having water flood into your lungs, basically by holding a pocket of air. So in light of all that, you would imagine...
Crocodiles do that better. They have posteriorly
doubt.
Displaced external nares so that they can keep the front part of their nose underwater and they can still be breathing.
Yep. And they take advantage of the fact that we're not all that well structured by rolling us.
They take advantage of us all the time.
Drown. Yes, that is the nature of crocodiles.
Yeah.
But the point is, there are reasons. There's a lot going on in the nose.
Internal nares. I misspoke. Sorry.
The fact of a lot going on in the nose predicts that you won't basically have the nose minimized. And if the nose isn't going to be minimized, you're going to get two kinds of variation. One of those kinds of variation is going to be arbitrary, right? Some populations just will have this and some will have that, but a lot of it will also be ecological, which is to say how much of a danger is heat loss to the environment, right? Where it's a greater danger, you will imagine greater elaboration in response. So anyway, basically there's going to be adaptive and non-adaptive variation. You would expect the non-adaptive variation to be minimal cost.
Yeah. And I guess there's maybe there's an assumption at the base of this, which is that large size is more expensive. And it's not clear. And I think part of what your explanation has been circling around is it's not just material expense that's the cost, right? Either in terms of growth or maintenance, but there's also, what kinds of functionality do you perhaps lose if you have less, for instance, sensory surface area inside your nose?
Yep. And actually, there are two ways in which this works. One is the only cost is not material, and the other is that you can't necessarily infer the material cost in a largely hollow object from the external dimensions. And so we may not be all that good at guessing how expensive various different noses are.
True. What is going on? Could they, I think this means we, could you have a live discussion with Dr. Pierre Corey? A peer-reviewed paper on ivermectin was published Thursday. I would like your input. Thank you. I can't remember exactly which guy Dr. Pierre Corey is.
I think he is the guy who
He's the ivermectin guy?
He's the ivermectin guy. I looked at his stuff, was pretty impressed by it early on. So anyway, I'd like to look at what was just published.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mary asks...
Actually, I'm certain it was him.
Okay. Given that intersex is expressed throughout human history, why should we not include it as a gender and perhaps aim for this gene, ? With adult trans people? So I'm not sure what aim for this gene, and the fact that you have a question mark, I think, means that maybe you're not sure that that's exactly the right phrasing either. So intersex is an incredibly rare developmental anomaly. And it has developmental and sometimes genetic, right? Like there are, I think, a few ways that it manifests. And trans, we also know, has we actually have a few mechanistic roots to it. There's, like I think I've mentioned before, there's a small population in either Haiti or Dominican Republic that actually has a really high rate of trans people, and it's actually been traced back to, indeed, a genetic variant. But probably most people who are what I call true trans, there isn't anything genetic going on. It's a mismatch that goes on at some point during development between the various complex systems that would normally be coincident. So I would, intersex isn't a gender. Intersex is, not A, not B in a binary system in which you have male and female, and it's binary, and intersex is that intermediate, which is an extraordinarily rare failure.
Well, I want to make that more precise in one way.
Okay.
Part of the problem, the reason it's not a gender, first of all, it isn't synonymous with trans at all.
Right.
Okay. But the second thing is, it's not one thing. Every case is, or I can't say every case because there may be cases that fall within a theme, but there are, as you point out, because there are a wide range of ways to get there, it's not one thing. It's not this and not that. And that means you've got a bucket of things that are together by virtue of not being in either of the traditional modes.
Yeah. But like, just to use the computer analogy with binary, like, it's not a 1, it's not a 0, it's a question mark.
Yeah. Or
it's a missing data, or, like there's a number of ways to arrive at, like, this is a binary system, but sometimes you don't have a 1 or a 0.
Right.
And that doesn't make it not binary.
Right. So I would say that in large measure, I think the trans ideology has basically used every place where something in the neighborhood of sex and gender is not simple. They've used every element of gray to create ambiguity. And the whole point is it's the ambiguity that's doing the heavy lifting. But in this case, there is intersex and there is trans, right? Mm-hmm. They're both real, but they're not the same thing. And therefore using one to, force something about the other is just incoherent.
Yeah. Are negative racial biases and stereotypes truly a part of our unconscious bias and heuristics, or are they subconscious patterns that get recalled? I think this question requires a real clear delineation between what unconscious and subconscious are. And I'm not sure that I buy that distinction at an absolute level sufficiently to therefore be able to answer the question, because I therefore I'm not sure that I buy the premise of the question that has that as the fundamental distinction.
Yeah. I will just say another route to addressing, I think, what you're getting at is there is an evolutionary reason that people should have biases against people from other populations, and it's very simple, which is that the tendency to share genes with people decreases the farther your degree of relatedness, or the more distant your degree of relatedness. That is not a condition we can't get over, but it is something we should expect to see, whether it manifests as a belief in inferiority or a, aggression towards or whatever. It doesn't really matter. What also doesn't matter, or no, I won't say it doesn't matter. What is not fundamental is the question of how that thing travels. And so it can travel entirely in software. I suspect it does travel mostly, if not entirely, in software. And because of that, it is relatively easy to get past it, right? You can rewrite the software. And so anyway, I think the thing is, you don't want to focus too much on the mechanism of transmission, unless, if the mechanism of transmission is genetic, right? If we're wired to dislike people who don't look like us, then we've got a very serious problem, because what do you do about genes, right? We're not going to CRISPR a new generation, but there's every indication that that's not the case, right? In fact, the very fact of improvement relative to racism suggests that it is housed in software, and that's good news.
I lost where I was. Here we go. Do bright, unnatural hair dyes have anything to do with signaling or faking toxicity? Or is it likely to be subconsciously interpreted that way? What else might be going on? I think it's actually the opposite in the case of bright hair. The idea of bright colors indicating toxicity is something known as asymptomatic coloration in biology, and it happens to be the frogs that I studied, both in the New World, the dark poison frogs, and the mantellas in Madagascar, are asymptomatically colored, and it's a warning to would-be predators. You can see this, and you have learned or somehow know to associate what this looks like with dangerous to you. So here is my big warning: do not eat. And this almost looks, it looks like an advertisement, but not of toxicity. And I think really, and I don't want to make a blanket statement really, but often of confusion, and people may have a thought about what it means to them when they decide to color their hair some color that is really completely not anything that ever would be found in nature. And sometimes it might be that they don't feel comfortable in their own skin, and this is I don't know why that would be a response to it, or they are maybe trying to keep attention away from them for some young women. Or I think, unfortunately, increasingly, given what we've done to young people, people who are growing up and who don't fit beauty norms, which didn't used to be the case at such a societal level, at such a population level, may choose to do things that render them even farther outside of the usual beauty norms. And I think if you asked them, mostly whatever answer they gave you would not necessarily be the thing that is actually true about why they made that decision.
Took me a long time through your excellent response to that question to understand what the question was really getting at. Like, we're talking about blue hair, for example.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I just didn't even occur to me until
I think so. Bright unnatural hair dyes. That's how I read that. Yep.
Well, see, I don't know why I read it this way, but I read it as unnatural to the person. So somebody choosing to dye their hair red or blonde or something like that. Yeah, now I get it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I would say I'm sure it's not one thing, but I think people show up in the world in ways that they perceive cause people to treat them more the way they want to be treated. And so it could be standoffish. It could be designed to take you out of a known category. So people, I don't know, are open to finding out that you're different than they would guess or something like that. Don't know, but
yeah. But it also it certainly contributes to the division and the anger now, that increasingly, it's a star on a sneetch for people both in the group and outside of the group, and it would be, I personally, I don't think it's safe. I don't think that, the dyes and hair dyes are not safe, and so I think it's ill-advised to color your hair, even if it looks like a color that you could have had. That said, this seems to me to now be being used to just further deepen the rifts between us.
Mm-hmm. And markers of in-group, out-group.
Yeah, markers of tribe. And, in general, I think markers of tribe are something that is what a lot of adolescence is about trying on, but really best if they can be temporary, and you can shed them later, and you don't have a permanent marker of that tribal affinity on social media or something that you have to constantly live with because someone screen captured it. So, playing around with identity is a real and necessary and enduring and permanent part of the human experience, but we all deserve the right to, get beyond it and then not have these permanent markers of identity that we chose when we were babies, effectively, sticking with us.
Yep, totally agree.
I always forget how to pronounce this university. In 1988, campus protests at, is it Gallaudet or Gallaudet?
I think it's Gallaudet.
Gallaudet? Okay, so in 1988, campus protests at Gallaudet University are remembered as Deaf President Now. If you are familiar, would you share your perspective? I did not know that. So Gallaudet is the university for deaf students. I'm sure that description would be taken as offensive, but basically that's right.
No, I'm not so sure.
Okay.
So I think the protest was to get a deaf president of Gallaudet, right?
That sounds like it. Yeah.
I think that's.
But I don't. But that's all I know.
Well, you could imagine that they were demanding a deaf president of the country, but no, I think this is about. I mean,
I don't think so.
We've certainly had our share of tone deaf presidents, especially of late. But in this case, yeah, I mean, we're in a tough spot because the fact of a college for the deaf that is not led by a member of the deaf community has got to be a bit alienating. On the other hand, what is the purpose of a college president? And, to the extent that we speak as insiders, because we have been, at colleges, the college president is in part an outward facing entity, right? And so what I would say is there's a trade-off. And are you better off as a deaf college to have a deaf president, or are you better off as a deaf college to have somebody who deeply understands the plight of the deaf and is in a position to speak on their behalf to those who are not deaf? And I don't know. I have no idea.
No, I don't know either. I imagine that there have been, of course, these conversations will have happened at HBCUs as well, historically Black colleges and universities. And I guess I assume that most of those have had a Black president.
Yeah.
But I don't actually know. And
but in that case, I think it's easier. I mean, in fact, I think it's probably easy.
Okay.
In the sense that there's no reason. There are plenty of Black people who can inhabit that job, and yes, it will not.
It's a big enough pool right.
Yeah. It's not a tiny pool, and it's not. Well, but it's also not an obstacle to deafness is unfortunately an obstacle to communication, and so to the extent that this is communicating to the outside world.
I'm totally with you on the second reason, right? Like deafness is actually a handicap. Yes, I used that word, right? And Blackness shouldn't be, to the degree that it has been, it's imposed, right? Societally. But, the argument in general against saying, okay, we want someone of this demographic is no matter how giant that demographic is, even if that demographic is 90% of the population, like, okay, let's, 90%, like we need a right-hander for this job. Well, what if the right person happens to be a left-hander?
Right.
I mean, yes, obviously the candidate pool for presidents of historically black colleges and universities, if you're only looking at black people, is going to be quite large, but it's still smaller than if you were looking at everyone.
Well, I agree. I mean, if we were talking about, something where the skill set, if you're looking for a surgeon, you want the best person, no matter what color they are, right?
Yeah.
If you're looking for somebody who's the head of a black college, then their insight into being black is presumably an asset that, it's not to say you couldn't have a more qualified candidate who isn't going to be black, but I find the likelihood of it pretty low, right? Because part of what the college is about addressing that experience.
Well, and I mean, I guess that argument can be applied to these protests that I wasn't aware of in 1988 at Gallaudet.
Right,
I can't pronounce
right.
it.
Except that there's a disadvantage that comes with it, which is
there's two, right? That it's an actual handicap, and it's such a tiny proportion of the population.
Yeah. But I guess what I would say is I'm pretty sure there's always a question about whether students are really in a position to decide who ought to be in charge of a college because they are there inherently temporarily.
Right.
But if Gallaudet, I think the population of Gallaudet is probably in a pretty good position to know whether their interests are better represented by somebody who understands their experience more directly by virtue of being deaf, or somebody who's in a better position to interface with the non-deaf world.
Well, but I feel like you just elided. Like you said, there's always a question about whether or not students should be in a position, and then you said the population. So what do you mean by the population?
Well, what I would hope, and frankly, I don't know, I would imagine, but maybe I'm just wrong, that Gallaudet is, taught by a mostly deaf faculty. Mm-hmm. Do we have any idea whether that's likely to be true?
I don't know.
So if that's true, then the point
faculty
is...
or faculty and staff, or faculty and academic staff.
People who are there permanently. But, what you would hope, ideally, what you want is students in consultation with effectively the permanent population of
and that's what we've seen at, the universities that we've seen up close and personal with regard to some of the administrative stuff, and like who is enjoined to sit on things like hiring committees and
who
such.
Cannot avoid sitting on hiring committees.
Yes. And other committees. Almost always in I feel like I remember at 3 universities and colleges where I've managed to see it or be part of it, there's a student representative, such that the student is unlikely to be the person who makes the decision, but they could be the deciding vote in something. And in general, I feel like I've seen this. I saw this at UC Santa Cruz as well, but I know for sure that I was on committees as a student at University of Michigan, and I was on committees as faculty at Evergreen, and in many of those committees, obviously when I was a student, there was a student because it was me, and at Evergreen there were often students. And they were, carefully chosen, and it wasn't a mob, and it wasn't all students, and it wasn't a democratic vote, so that because students outnumber everyone else, they therefore get what they want. But students do deserve voice, just not, proportional to their numbers.
Yeah.
Where are we at, Zach? God, there are a lot of questions.
We're at an hour and 30
Okay.
minutes.
Let's try to get through like 4 more, because we have a ton of questions this hour.
All right.
And we're going to miss most of them. Apologies. Did either of you get vaccinated? If so, which one? Not yet.
Yeah, not yet. Mm-hmm. I imagine we will be forced to it eventually. But frankly, as we said early on, the more time there is, the more you know about the risks. And frankly, this week, we're finding out that the spike protein itself may do damage to the body at a significant level. That's certainly something you would want to know. It's
and also, one of the other ththings about that paper, which it looks like over the break, someone actually sent it and said that there was a reason that it hadn't been available. So it looks like we have access to it now.
Right.
But that paper out of who was it? Who did it? Salk Institute, right?
Yep.
lost it.
We're talking about the
it's okay.
wanting to know that the spike protein
No,
does
let's go
damage.
on.
Okay.
Given estimates that as many as 80% of species are still undiscovered, does that leave room for Bigfoot, Loch Ness, and other monsters?
No.
No.
Well, you know, there's,
I mean, monsters. It depends on what you mean by monsters. Neither of those particular monsters, but
yeah. Let's put it this way. Those numbers about the number of species that are undiscovered are both interesting and not as interesting as you might think because of what those species likely are. In many of those cases, probably the vast majority of them, they are minor variants on things that are known. Right, so there will be lots of fungal species we're not particularly good at sorting out.
Well, and they're also going to be just a ton of single-celled
Right,
things.
there's going to be single-celled things.
It's
there's going to be
very rare to discover a new mammal.
Fungi, right? There's going to be lots of insects that we don't know, but they're not going to be. You know, there's a question of how big a clade some new thing that you find actually represents, and in general, these are going to be species and clades we know.
Yeah.
So in general, we are not talking about large creatures. Now, every so often, some interesting new mammal pops up in Vietnam or someplace. This happens. But, you know, they don't tend to be gigantic. They tend to be, you know, it'd be really interesting to find something that size. It happens every decade or so.
There was a new primate within the last decade or two, but it wasn't super surprised. Like, it wasn't like, whoa, what is that? It was we actually think that's new. We're going to call it a different species from this other species to which it is clearly sister.
Right.
Right.
So that
like
happens.
The big charismatic stuff. Well, it wasn't splitting. It wasn't like we already know this is the case and now we've created a new species. It's like, no, there's discovery of a new morph of a thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, this is new, but it's clearly closely related to that. That wasn't over in systematic space splitting. This is a discovery. But that is going to be how that's going to be what the new species discoveries of the charismatic megafauna. And I would say that Bigfoot or Loch Ness definitely would qualify as charismatic megafauna.
Yes. Now, the deep ocean could harbor some stuff.
Yeah, that's why I said it depends on what you mean by monsters. There might be monsters
in the deep ocean.
Yeah.
There can be, although chances that we've never seen a carcass or evidence from a sub or something like that is low. There's weird stuff. I remember a long time ago, back when I was at Penn as an early undergraduate, a discussion of Gigantopithecus, which was known from teeth, where we actually had the teeth, but we didn't have the rest of the creature. Probably this is an extinct creature, but one that has existed until late enough that there would be teeth on the surface, subfossil stuff. So I don't know. Yeah, I think I wouldn't be betting on Bigfoot. It's pretty hard to imagine that it would have anywhere to go that we would not be happening on it with some regularity. And of course, there was a lot of hoax stuff. You know, people who had feet manufactured that they walked around to leave the impression of a Bigfoot. Interestingly, I have not told you.
Of course that happened. But
Toby is very hard to photograph, and I was, when we were out for your birthday, photographing him, trying to capture the actual creature as he exists in the wild. Not a simple job, but I did get a sequence that is almost exactly like that famous sequence of Bigfoot, you know, the 3 or 4 frames walking out of the forest.
Is he equally out of focus as Bigfoot is in that sequence?
He is in somewhat better focus than that sequence.
I expect nothing less of you, yes.
Oh, I should show you some of the out of focus stuff, because this new camera of ours, it creates it's so high resolution that you can tell that almost everything is out of focus almost all the time.
All right. Any thoughts on if or how much long COVID could be placebo or side effect of being locked inside and socially isolated for long periods of time? I guess I would add to your list of possibilities is that it's exacerbated by. So placebo is one possibility. A side effect that is like largely caused by locked inside and socially isolated, or there's something real, maybe autoimmune, which is what we've both thought, that is, perhaps wildly exacerbated by the social stuff that's going on, and the lack of activity and the lack of sunlight and everything else.
Yeah, I will say it is certain,
Mhm.
I would say, given the vagaries of physiology and the complexity of it, that some fraction of those who think they have long COVID either have something psychosomatic or have something else that
Sure.
was just coincident in time. But my guess, having spent a lot of time on the long haul COVID subreddit, is that there's an awful lot of long haul COVID that's just simply real, very mysterious. And medicine has a bias where it doesn't like dealing with things it doesn't understand anything about. And so it tends to be dismissive, and it was for too long. But anyway, so there are many things in play that could be doing this. One of them is the arms race between virus and immune system leaves. So if you'll remember my explanation of how the immune system works, it evolves towards solutions to pathogens. It also has holes so that you don't respond to your own tissues. And that means that to the extent that any pathogen resembles your own tissue, it has an advantage because it can hide from the immune system in the holes in the immune system that are reserved for self. And so there is every opportunity here for autoimmunity to evolve. There is every opportunity for spike protein and possible antibodies to spike protein. So there are things called anti-antibodies. So anyway, there are lots of things that could be inducing this. And the fact that some of it will inherently be psychosomatic should not cause us to dismiss the phenomenon as that. It really doesn't look like it. And, we're talking about something super complex.
Yeah. Okay. Next. Are there any studies supporting asymptomatic spread? Is there any real evidence of this? And then the third part of this question, I don't quite understand. By CDC, 1/3 of 2020 excess deaths are not COVID. What the fuck? So I don't know. I'm not aware of what that is in reference to, or to what the CDC might attribute excess deaths that are, a third of the excess deaths from 2020, if not COVID. With regard to the studies supporting asymptomatic spread, while you were talking just now, Bret, I went and looked, and it was episode. I can't find it again. God, this computer. Episode 60. What was it? Episode 63, where we talked about a paper that came out this year, Johansson et al., SARS-CoV-2 transmission from people without COVID-19 symptoms, and that was mid-January of this year that we talked about that paper. And really, I found that it was a terrible paper and did not provide the evidence for asymptomatic spread that the authors of the paper imagined or claimed that it did. That said, I have not gone and searched explicitly on asymptomatic spread papers since then. I seem to collect a fair number of COVID papers, but it's possible that something came out that I haven't seen, although I doubt it. Therefore, the answer to the question is I don't really think so. That there is certainly asymptomatic spread, but the idea that it's super, super common is largely, when I have seen it, that claim made in the media, it largely traces back to that one paper that I feel like I pretty much debunked back in January.
Well, so let's separate between asymptomatic spread and pre-symptomatic spread.
100% not the same thing at all.
Right.
Really
and
not the
there's
same
definitely
thing.
pre-symptomatic spread.
For sure.
And
that paper did point out the distinction, but then couldn't delineate between them in some cases.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's also the question about how the vaccine, which does seem to reduce symptoms in people who get the vaccine and then get sick, does it increase the likelihood of asymptomatic spread, or does it reduce sickness and spread? And so anyway,
it's a question, but I mean, I think I'm not saying it. We know it happens some.
Yep.
I don't think it I see no reason to suspect that it happens as much as that paper said it did, because the data that paper was relying on did not say what even it said they did.
Yeah.
So that leaves us with the question of how much is it happening?
How common, yeah.
How common is it? And I don't know. I have not seen any evidence.
Yeah, I don't know
Yeah.
either. I certainly leave open the possibility this is a weird enough disease that it may be doing something very different, but I wouldn't leap to conclusions either way.
Yeah. I'm going to just find one more fun question to end on.
Fun?
Well, I'll try.
All right.
I'll try. No, it's just going to take me too long. So I will. There are 3 questions, 2 from the last hour that are from Poland. So I'm just going to. I think 2 of them are just comments. So I'm just going to read the 3 questions from Poland because there's a geographic connection, and that gets us through a few more. Let's see. Where were we? I lost one of them. Okay, there's just 2. Hey, I don't even listen to Super Chat section, but greetings from Poland, folks. You keep me entertained and educated every Saturday night. Great job. And the other one that I thought was from Poland was from Portland.
All right.
Apparently can't read. Thanks for keeping a level head through these times. Keep up the good work, Weinstein family. Much love from Portland. Love that. And love, this person says, the green Mini in the back.
Yes.
Which we built with my mother, as she has, it's not green, but she has a Mini.
She has a Mini.
Yeah.
Yes, which suits her well.
Yes, it does. Okay, final question. Poland banned, see, we're back to Poland now.
We're back to
Not
Poland.
Portland. This is Poland. Poland banned woke ideology in schools. In the U.S., it is engraved in schools and companies. Identity politics is increasing. Is this reversible? When did it start? Well, that's a giant question.
Yes, I'm betting
That's a giant question.
Poland will become more powerful by virtue of the fact that its people can still think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a crazy prediction. Yeah, that's really out there.
Yeah, it's wild. But I don't know. I mean, I'm of course troubled by the idea of banning stuff, because once you step on that slippery slope, where does it go? But certainly keeping wokeness out of your schools is a great idea, and I really wish we were doing that, because you never know. Kids could turn out to be the future.
Kids could turn out to be the future. Yeah. Yep. There are a lot of different timescale answers to when did it start, and I think 2 of them. I think there's something much deeper in time that I don't have a grasp on yet. But the 2 time periods that I point to most in terms of helping to create the ascendancy of the woke ideology are sort of the rise of postmodernism in academia in the 80s and 90s, actually when we were in college, and then it kind of disappeared. It was always in these like niche fields. The problem was that some of those students who were studying it went on to become academics themselves, and they've taken over departments and created whole new fields, and they're just on the rise. So that's one sort of from 30-ish years ago. And then the second, of course, is this perfect storm that we've talked about a lot, and that Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt talk about in their book, The Coddling of the American Mind, of the screens. And actually, I'm not sure that they talk about, I don't remember which of these things they all talk about. They definitely talk about the bad parenting in terms of helicopter parenting and snowplow parenting, the rise of screens, and to some degree what's on them. But we talk specifically about just the danger of the screens themselves, the interactions with the screens, and then the pharmaceutical drugs for mood disorders, both real and imagined, that came together in such that by 2013 or so is the date that they propose, and that is a match for our anecdotal experience and that of many other people whom we have talked to. Increasingly, the students who we were meeting in college classrooms had a different air about them. That it was different, and that then was a match for students who had been raised in this toxic stew, going to college, and in some cases, depending on what classes they chose to take, meeting nothing but postmodern idiocy in the classroom. And like I said, I think there's something that goes farther back in time than that starts farther back in time than that. And there are, of course, roots of this and shades of it and variations in various political ideologies. All of that is true. But this particular, like, how do we get to this particular spot? Those are two of the more recent things, but there's something deeper as well. And I don't really have a fix on it.
I would just add, I think there, if you have a fringe viewpoint, you also perceive that you can't wield power. And the coddling of these viewpoints inside of universities created a kind of an incubator where the ideas developed, but they didn't have the power to take over. And then there was a demographic shift, which may have to do with the characteristics that Haidt and Lukianoff point to that came together, but something caused a recognition that actually now they had enough power to start wielding and to have effect. And so there's this, just whatever threshold was crossed where you detect that we are now in a position to make things happen. And I think that happened in the last few years.
Yeah. I think that's right. I think we're done.
I think we are there.
Yes.
Yes.
So please consider joining us at one or both of our Patreons. Subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the Clips channel, tell your friends, share on whatever modes you feel like sharing with people whom you think might be interested. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I'll finish up.
Go outside.
Be good to the people you love and eat good food and go outside.
All right. We'll see you soon.